For 10 years, she lived a life carved from silence. A solitary woman in an old house, she existed at the edge of a deep, ancient forest, a place that held its breath and kept its secrets. But she would soon learn that some secrets cannot be kept forever, and that compassion can lead you to choices you never thought possible. She found an impossible creature, broken and dying, and in an act of defiance against fear, she hid it in her basement for months. What happened in that dark, quiet space would not just save its life, it would shatter and remake her own. The woman, Alara, knew the rhythms of solitude. Her days followed the sun's slow arc across the sky. She tended her small garden, mended her own fences, and read by the light of a single lamp in the evenings. The world outside her property line was a distant hum, a rumor she no longer paid any mind to. Her only companion was the forest. It was a vast, imposing presence. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches interlocking to form a dense canopy that sunlight struggled to pierce. It was a world unto itself, and she respected its boundaries. She took only what she needed from its edges, fallen branches for firewood, wild berries in the summer. She never ventured too deep. Yet, in recent weeks, the forest character had changed. Its familiar silence felt different. It felt watched. Sometimes, while pulling weeds from her carrot patch, the hair on her arms would stand up. She would turn, slowly, expecting to see a deer or a fox, but there was only the impenetrable wall of green and shadow. The feeling lingered long after she went back inside. The sound started soon after. They were not the calls of owls or the cries of coyotes she knew so well. These were deeper, more resonant. A low, mournful call that seemed to rise from the very earth itself, echoing through the valley on moonless nights. It was a sound of profound loneliness, and it settled deep in her bones. Then came the physical signs. A young maple tree, as thick as her thigh, was snapped cleanly in half, 10 feet from the ground. She found a single, enormous footprint pressed into the soft mud by the creek bed after a heavy rain. It was shaped like a man's, but impossibly large, the toes long and powerful. She stared at it until the water washed its edges away, telling herself it was just a trick of the light, a strange shadow. She chose not to believe. It was easier that way. The autumn rains came with a fury that year. The sky turned a bruised purple, and wind lashed the trees, tearing leaves from their branches. For 3 days, the storm raged. Alara stayed inside, listening to the rain hammer against the roof and the wind howl like a hungry animal. On the 3rd night, a sound broke through the storm's chaos. It was a sharp crack, like a giant bone snapping, followed by a heavy, wet thud that shook the very foundation of her house. She waited, her heart pounding against her ribs. The storm raged on, but beneath it, she heard something else. A low, guttural moan. It was not the sound of the wind or a falling branch. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. It was close, too close. Curiosity and a strange, unwelcome sense of duty fought against her fear. The sound was one of suffering, and her entire life had been defined by a quiet compassion. She could not ignore it. She pulled on her heavy raincoat, grabbed the strongest flashlight she owned, and opened the back door to the screaming dark. The wind tore at her, and the rain was a cold shock against her face. She followed the sound, her boots sinking into the saturated earth. It led her to the steep ravine that bordered the western edge of her property. The flashlight beam cut a nervous path through the driving rain. It fell upon a scene of devastation. A massive oak tree at the ravine's edge had been struck by lightning, a huge limb torn away. And beneath it, half buried in mud and shattered wood, was the source of the sound. It was a creature from a forgotten world. It was immense, taller than any man, even lying down. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur the color of wet earth and old pine needles. One of its long, powerful legs was bent at an unnatural angle, pinned beneath the fallen oak limb. A dark, ugly wound tore through the muscle of its thigh, slick with rain and blood. It was a monster, a legend, a thing that should not exist. But as it turned its head, its great, dark eyes met hers. And in them, Alara saw no malice. She saw no threat. She saw only a stunned, bewildered agony. It was the same look she had once seen in the eyes of a deer caught in a hunter's trap. It was an animal cornered and broken. She froze. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to lock her doors, hide in her home, and pretend she had seen nothing. This was not her world. This was not her problem. It was a beast of the deep woods, and she was a small, fragile human. But the creature let out another low moan, a sound that vibrated through the soles of her feet. It was a plea. It was surrender. In that moment, it was not a monster. It was simply a living thing, in desperate need of help. Her fear did not vanish, but something stronger rose to meet it. Empathy. She could not leave it here to die in the mud and the rain. But she could not help it here, either. The storm was too strong, the night too dark. An idea, insane and terrifying, formed in her mind. Her basement. It was empty, save for old jars and forgotten furniture. It was dry. It was hidden. The decision was a weight in her chest. To bring this thing, this impossible thing, into her home was to cross a line from which there was no return. It was madness. But to leave it was a cruelty she could not live with. Her compassion won. It always did. The next hours were a blur of strenuous, terrifying work. She got the old logging chain and the come-along winch from the barn. With trembling hands, she managed to loop the chain around the massive oak limb. The winch groaned in protest, but slowly, inch by agonizing inch, the weight lifted. The creature cried out as the pressure on its legs shifted, a sound so deep it felt like the earth itself was groaning. Once its leg was free, a new, more terrifying problem arose. How to move it? It tried to rise, its powerful arms pushing against the mud, but its broken leg gave way. It collapsed with a grunt of pain and exhaustion. Its dark eyes found hers again, a silent question within them. Trust me, she thought, though she did not dare speak. Using a heavy canvas tarp from the barn, she managed to get it underneath the creature's immense torso. It was a slow, grueling process. The creature seemed to understand, shifting its great weight to help her. It watched her every move, its breathing heavy and ragged. Finally, she was able to drag it, sliding it across the slick mud and wet grass, toward the sloping bulkhead doors of her basement. The journey of 50 yards felt like 50 miles. Getting it down the stone steps was the hardest part. It was a controlled slide, a chaotic tumble of mud, rain, and matted fur. They landed in a heap on the cold concrete floor. For a long moment, they both lay there, exhausted and breathing heavily in the sudden, echoing silence of the enclosed space. She had done it. The monster was in her house. The first few days were a blur of tension. She left the bulkhead doors slightly ajar for air and locked the interior door that led to the rest of the house. She was a prisoner in her own home, constantly aware of the huge, wounded presence in the darkness below. She brought it water in a large bucket and left old, clean blankets near its hulking form. She brought food, a basket of apples from her cellar, a loaf of bread. At first, it refused to eat while she was there. It would only watch her with those unsettlingly intelligent eyes. She learned to leave the offerings at the top of the stairs and retreat, listening for the soft sounds of it eating in the dark. Section. The wound on its leg was bad. It was deep and ragged, and she could smell the faint, sour scent of infection beginning to set in. She knew if she did nothing, the injury would kill it. She gathered supplies, a basin of hot water, antiseptic, clean cloths, and bandages. Carrying them down the steps felt like walking into a lion's den. It watched her approach, a low rumble starting deep in its chest. She stopped. She held up her empty hands, showing she meant no harm. "I will not hurt you," she whispered, her voice barely a sound in the cavernous space. The words felt foolish, but they were all she had. She set the basin down, far enough away to be safe. She dipped a cloth in the warm water and held it out. The rumbling continued, a clear warning. She did not move. She just waited, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. This was the test. She knew it. Slowly, deliberately, the creature shifted its weight. Its massive arm, corded with muscle, lifted from the floor. Its hand, broad and calloused, with thick, dark nails, reached toward her. She held her breath, expecting to be swatted away, to be crushed. But the hand stopped just inches from her face. It was a gesture of immense restraint. It was gauging her reaction. She did not scream. She did not run. She met its gaze and held it, forcing herself to remain calm. She gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. After a long, silent moment, the hand retreated. The rumbling in its chest subsided. She had passed. Over the next several weeks, a quiet routine formed. She would tend to its wound twice a day. The first time she touched it, its entire body went rigid. But she was gentle, her movements slow and predictable. She cleaned the injury as best she could, packed it with a poultice of herbs she knew had healing properties, and wrapped it in clean bandages. It bore the pain with a stoic silence, its only reaction a tightening of the muscles in its jaw. It began to heal. The infection receded, and new, healthy tissue started to form. It started to eat more, and its strength slowly returned. It would sometimes sit up, leaning its broad back against the cold stone wall, and simply watch her as she went about her chores upstairs. She could feel its gaze through the floorboards, a constant, silent presence. The basement became a sanctuary, not a prison. The fear that had initially consumed her was replaced by a profound sense of awe. She saw its intelligence in the way it watched her, in the way it learned her routines. It learned the sound of her footsteps, the time of day she would bring food. One afternoon, she brought down a handful of wild strawberries she had found. It was a small offering, a gift. She placed them in its open palm. It looked at the berries, then at her. It lifted one to its mouth and ate it. Then, it held the rest of the berries out, offering them back to her. She was stunned. She gently shook her head, and it ate the rest. It was a moment of reciprocity, a shared understanding that transcended words. The months passed. Autumn faded into the deep cold of winter. The creature was almost fully healed. It could stand now, though it still favored its injured leg. It would pace the length of the basement, a restless energy building within it. Its sheer size was breathtaking. It had to stoop to avoid hitting its head on the low ceiling beams. She realized the confinement was beginning to wear on it. It would often stand by the small, grimy basement window, peering out at the snow-covered forest. A low, mournful sound would sometimes escape its lips, the same lonely call she had heard before the storm. It was a call for its own kind, a sound of longing for the world it had lost. She knew her home could not be its home forever. The climax of their strange relationship came on a bitter night in late winter. A blizzard raged outside, piling snow in deep drifts against the house. A pipe in the old furnace burst, and the house grew cold with alarming speed. Alara worked desperately to fix it, her hands numb, her tools clumsy. She slipped on a patch of ice on the concrete floor, and a heavy wrench fell from her grasp, striking her hard on the temple. The world went black. When she awoke, she was disoriented and shivering. The basement was frigid. She tried to stand, but a wave of dizziness sent her back to the floor. She was weak, and the cold was seeping into her bones. She knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she was in serious trouble. She heard a sound from the other side of the basement. A heavy, shuffling step. The creature emerged from the shadows. It stood over her, a colossal silhouette in the dim light. This was it, she thought. The end. But it did not harm her. Instead, it knelt beside her. Its movements were slow, deliberate. It gathered the old, dusty blankets she had given it months ago. Gently, with a surprising dexterity in its massive hands, it wrapped them around her shivering body. Then, it did something that shattered her understanding of the world. It lay down beside her, positioning its immense, fur-covered body between her and the cold draft from the window. It was a living wall, a source of profound, radiating warmth. It emitted a low, soft rumble. It was not a growl of threat, but a sound of comfort, like a mother cat's purr, a sound of reassurance. In that moment, the roles were reversed. The patient had become the protector. The monster had become the savior. She felt the warmth of its body seep into her own, chasing away the deadly chill. She closed her eyes, safe in the embrace of the impossible, and drifted into a healing sleep. When she woke again, the sun was streaming through the small window. The blizzard had passed. She was stiff and sore, but the deadly cold had receded. The creature was sitting up, watching her, its dark eyes filled with a calm intelligence. She looked at it, and for the first time, she spoke to it as an equal. "Thank you," she whispered. It responded with a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of clear, unambiguous understanding. It had saved her life, just as she had saved its. The debt was paid. The exchange was complete. Spring arrived, and with it, a great thawing. The snow receded, and the forest began to wake up. The creature's restlessness grew. It spent most of its days at the bulkhead doors, sniffing the air, listening to the sounds of the returning birds. Its leg was fully healed. It was strong again. It was time. She knew what she had to do. One evening, as dusk settled over the valley, she unbolted the heavy bulkhead doors and pushed them open. The cool, evening air, rich with the smell of damp earth and new life, flooded the musty basement. The creature walked to the opening and stood on the threshold, silhouetted against the fading light. It was magnificent, wild, free. It belonged out there, not in her cellar. It turned its head and looked back at her one last time. There were no sounds, no gestures. There was only a shared gaze, a moment of profound and silent communication. In its eyes, she saw gratitude. She saw respect. And she saw goodbye. She gave a small, sad smile and nodded. It was enough. It turned and walked up the stone steps. It did not run. It moved with an immense, unhurried dignity. It crossed her small yard and, without a backward glance, stepped into the deep shadows of the forest. It moved between the trees, its dark form melting into the woods until it was simply gone, as if it had never been there at all. Alara stood at the open basement door for a long time, listening to the sounds of the evening. The silence it left behind was different. It was heavier. The house, which had been her sanctuary, now felt impossibly empty. The world felt smaller, more mundane. She went back inside and closed the doors, the heavy bolts sliding home with a final, echoing thud. The basement was just a basement again. But for her, it would always be a place of magic, a place where the barrier between two worlds had dissolved for a few precious months. She never spoke of it to anyone. The secret was too large, too sacred to be shared. It was hers alone. Sometimes, on quiet nights, she would walk to the edge of the woods and listen. She would hope to hear its deep, lonely call, but she never did. The forest was no longer just a collection of trees to her. It was a place that held a soul. It was a place of wonder and mystery. She had looked into the eyes of a legend and had seen not a beast, but a being capable of pain, gratitude, and compassion. She had lived a quiet life, but for a short time, she had held the most shocking, beautiful, and impossible secret in the world. And that knowledge, that memory, was the greatest gift of her long, solitary life.